Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Lexi and today, as you can probably tell from the title, I am bringing you my spoiler-filled review of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. I actually finished this one just a few days ago, so I have had some time to sit and think and to write up some notes about my thoughts as well. I think the most linear way to talk about my feelings towards this book is to just go start to finish. So I'll be starting with part 1 and then part 2 and part 3. If you are still reading the book, then feel free to just stick to the part that you're up to. I wouldn't want to spoil anything for anyone, but this is a spoiler-filled review. So if you have not finished the book and you don't want any spoilers, please click out of this now and come back once you've finished. Otherwise, I'll leave in my description where each of the parts start. So if you're up to the beginning of part 2 and you want to hear my thoughts on part 1, you can just stick to that section. I just want to preface this as well by saying that I really loved the book. I do love a good discussion though. So if there's things that you don't agree with my thoughts, I would love to hear them and I'd love to chat about this book. I've already had some really great conversations with some people on Instagram, and it's been a really great time just comparing thoughts and comparing what we did and didn't like about the book. So far, I've found that my opinion is actually quite a controversial one. A lot of people have not liked this book, but honestly, I'm gonna tell you why I liked it and what I loved about it. So without further ado, without further rambling from me, let's get into the video. I also want to say I'm probably going to pronounce the names completely wrong. That was one thing that I really struggled with the entire book through, was just getting the names right. Like, I honestly didn't even know his name was Coriolanus. Like, I thought it was Cornelius. Let me know if I'm just stupid or if anyone else thought that too. But I'm just going to refer to him as Corio or Snow, whatever just obviously comes out. But yeah, I probably am going to say a lot of the names wrong, so please forgive me. Okay, so part 1. Basically, in part 1, we really get to know Corio for his young self. As you guys read, he's 18, he's at school, he's got still quite a sheltered life. He has obviously gone through the war and losing his parents, and he now is living with Tigress and his grandmom. But I would still say that he lives quite a sheltered life. Just the way that he talks about not only the Hunger Games, but also about other injustices that happen in Panem. He still seems to live quite sheltered, even though he's going through poverty, even though he's lost his family, experienced war, etc., etc. Knowing that about him in this period of his life, I think that that does help to define what he turns into. And reading part 1, it sort of gives you that inkling that something's not quite right in him. Whether that's that he's just born with this nature of evil, or whether that's a response to the circumstances he's living in. I honestly was grabbed by the story in the first chapter. Like, I was honestly so shocked to find out that he was poor. Like, I don't know if people knew that when they were going into this, but I was so shocked. I thought we were just gonna get like a little privileged guy and how he's running the capital, blah, 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 blah. So I was already impressed just with the first chapter. I also was really shocked about the connection to Tigress. I did not think that they were going to be cousins. Part 1 also for me was really great because it established this Panem that we didn't know. It told us so much more about the early Hunger Games. As you know, this book starts with the 10th Hunger Games, so 10 years after the war and 64 years before we meet Katniss. And I was shocked at how different the Hunger Games was in the society. I did initially think that this book would give us a lot more information about the war and sort of what happened in the war, but I'm also really glad that it didn't, in a sense. Like, it gave us enough that we had a bit more information than what we did in the first trilogy, but not too much that it got bogged down and it got heavy and too political right at the beginning. And I know this might be another unpopular opinion, but I really did feel somewhat sympathetic towards Corio. Like, he's lost his parents and a lot has changed for him in his 18 years of life. He wasn't that bad at the start. Obviously, just like everybody else who's reading or has read this book, I absolutely love Lucy Gray. She's a little gem. She now holds a special place in my heart, And she was honestly such a perfect protagonist. Like, I don't know anyone who could have read this and not been rooting for her. Her whole entrance into the book was so dramatic and it was so needed as well. Like, it just set the tone for what Lucy was going to achieve and how she was going to make an impact in this book. Moving on to part 2. Part 2 was mainly like what was happening in the Hunger Games and sort of how Koyo gets thrown into the Hunger Games as well. So I really loved this section. I will say now though that my favorite part is the third part. I think that's probably similar to a lot of you guys. There's just so much happening in part 3 and it's so critical to the story and most critical to the Hunger Games trilogy as well. Part 2 still definitely did shine for me though. It's kind of weird to say, but I did really enjoy being back in like the Hunger Games scenario and seeing how Lucy Gray was going to survive. It was sort of predictable that she was going to be the victor, but obviously that had to happen. Again, I think this part was really critical for understanding how the Hunger Games turns into what it becomes in the later novels. While we were in the arena, I just kept feeling like the game makers were about to do something to like call her out or push her in a right direction. And it was really refreshing that they didn't. That happened to Katniss so many times in the 74th and the 75th Hunger Games. The game makers toying with the arena to get it their way and to make it more entertaining. But in this Hunger Games, they kind of just let it play out naturally and they kind of just let the tributes take each other out as well. We also didn't really get to know that much about Lucy Gray in this section. I feel like she really shines in both part 1 and part 3. It really focuses on Koyo and just how those intrusive thoughts start to manifest. We see him start to grapple with doing the right thing by Lucy and doing the right thing by the Capitol, and we get introduced to this internal struggle that he's facing. We also see Sejanus rise in this section as well and become so much more prominent. I'll just say now as well, like, he is my second favorite character from this book. Like, he was amazing. I really can't think of a better way for them to have shown how Koyo could have gone in a completely different way. He could have turned out more like Sejanus, who is exposed to these things in his society, and instead of turning evil for it or turning inward for it, he looks to the outward. He wants to make things better. He wants to change it, and that really is how Koyo could have gone. But unfortunately, he lets it affect him so personally and takes everything as such an attack that he turns into what we know later on as President Snow. It was also super empowering to read the scene where Lucy Gray had the snakes come up like her dress, and that scene was honestly so amazing and it was very well written.
Oh,
and I just
my
felt
God!
all of the emotions for poor Lucy Gray. And obviously it felt like a massive win when Lucy was crowned the victor, but of course we had that sinking feeling that no cheater was gonna get away with cheating in the Hunger Games. Now for part 3. This, like I mentioned earlier, was my absolute favorite part. The final part of this book was super pivotal to how Koyo turns into President Snow. This part also made it super clear to me why he hates Katniss just so much, apart from the fact that she's getting all these rebels to turn against him. Obviously, apart from that, this book made it super obvious that she just reminds him so much of Lucy Gray, and she reminds him of what he could have become had he done the right thing all those years ago. Lucy Gray not only comes from the same district, but she also sings the same songs that we will later hear Katniss sing. They both are described as being like a similar kind of person, like similar look. And obviously the Mockingjays, like his hatred for the Mockingjays comes from this book. I 100% understand why he hates the Mockingjays. Like, how traumatic to hear someone's last words repeated and sung out and just flown around you. Like, that's traumatic. 100% I understand why he hated the birds. But I think it's their symbolism as something that came out of chaos and out of a loss of control of the Capitol. Like, the birds breeding, they were able to do that even though the Capitol said they probably shouldn't have. They shouldn't have been able to survive in the wild. And I think that Katniss then adopting that as her symbol that kind of shows how she is a rebel and shows how just because the Capitol say something has to be like this doesn't mean that it can't be, like, it can't be challenged. Honestly, through this whole part, I was just rooting for Lucy and Koryo. Like, I wanted him to not turn into what we knew he was going to turn into. At so many points, I was just thinking, don't do it. Please do not do it. Don't make that mistake. And I'm sure you've all felt the same way about a fictional character. You just want to shake them and tell them to stop being stupid. But of course, I knew how it would have to end. I was, however, pleasantly surprised by the final conflict, or the final thing that breaks Koryo and turns him into what he becomes. I honestly thought it was just going to be one single traumatic event. Like, I thought somehow the Capitol was going to kill Lucy Gray and have it be done right in front of him, make it all lead back to his fault, and it be very, like, traumatic. So once I read the scene where they decide to make it on their own, they decide they're going to escape, then they get to the shack, and then they find the guns. Oh my god, I was just like, this is not how I thought it was going to go. This moment that but reflecting on it over the last few days, I really think it was the best way to go. I think it really highlights how Koryo was a result of his own choices. He could have done the right thing, but this internal fight that he has between doing the right thing for himself, doing the right thing for the Capitol, or doing the right thing in general, that becomes very clear in that moment where he decides that Lucy Gray is against him and Lucy Gray is framing him and it's all going to come out and he is going to fall. That selfishness and that choosing yourself over the right thing, I think that could only be so uncovered to us through this series of bad events that happened to him. If it had just been one traumatic event that flicked him, I don't think it would have been as impactful and as real in a way. It would have been too cliche and you wouldn't have had any understanding or sympathy or empathy for him. I also really loved the role of the Covey in this book, and I think it was something that was definitely a good add to the story. We have these people that don't identify as district, they don't identify as capital, they identify as Covey, and the things that they value are like self-choice and artistic expression and all those kinds of things. I did think they were a really good example or metaphor for displaced people after the wartime. So people like the gypsies, people that just try to hold on to what they can of their traditions, even when they're thrust into these new environments and told, no, you have to conform to this square box. They do their absolute best to try and avoid that and not fall to society's expectations or standards for them. So I really loved all of the members of the Covey, especially little Maud Ivory. Like, she was so adorable. And I'll talk about some theories as well where she sort of comes into play in that. But she was such a lovable character, and I absolutely adored the songs and the tradition that we learnt from the Covey people. There is also a girl here on YouTube who is bringing those songs to life. Her account here on YouTube is Maiah Wynne. Again, I'll leave it in my description bar if you want to check her out. Her songs sound amazing, and honestly, it's exactly what I could hear in my mind when I would read the lyrics. Okay, so onto theories. I also just want to mention that a lovely girl here on YouTube made an awesome video explaining how she believes Katniss and Lucy Gray are related. I will leave her link in my description because I 100% support her theory. I think she's dead on that one. Her YouTube name is The Geek Apprentice. Like I said, I'll leave her video in my description. I think you should really check it out. But basically, her video describes how all these little things in the book explain how they could be related, and 100% I think she's correct. Another girl here on BookTube, Allison Aldridge, I'll leave her video down below as well. She has a different theory which I think could also work out. Basically, she believes that Lucy Gray lives and she actually travels north, which would have been District 13 apparently on the map. She believes that Lucy Gray becomes the ancestor of President Queen, and I think that's another really interesting and a really good theory as well. Personally, I don't know if any of those theories are are correct. I think potentially Lucy Gray's fate is just like Lucy Gray in the song where her name comes from. She just sort of mysteriously disappears. And I think that is quite a nice way to think about it as well, especially if this is just a standalone novel and it's not going to have any more sequels. Please let me know down in the comments what some of your theories are for what happens to Lucy Gray at the end of the novel. Do you think she died? Do you think she survives? Is she related to Katniss? Is Maud Ivory related to Katniss? What do you think is the fate of Lucy Gray? I would love to hear your thoughts. To summarize my thoughts for you guys, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes for me was definitely a 5 out of 5 star read. It was everything I wanted and honestly so much more. If you watched one of my vlogs where I opened this up, you'll honestly know I was not sure what to expect, seeing as I originally didn't really enjoy The Hunger Games, but rewatching it this year, I fell in love with the movies. I'm also super excited to see what they do with this when they bring it to screen. The most that I've heard is that it's going to be a movie. I honestly think you could do a TV show out of this, especially given that it has the 3 parts and He Really Thick. But honestly, I'd be happy with a movie. I thought the writing was amazing. I loved the little Easter eggs and connections to the original trilogy. I definitely enjoyed the character of Corio and Snow and how he turns into the villain that we know him as. And of course, Lucy Gray and Sejanus were my absolute favourites. Let me know if there's any other books that you would like me to review with spoilers. I never want to be that person that ruins a book for someone else. So I hope if you have watched this far that you did finish The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and let me know what you thought. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? I want to know what you think. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!